Today we're going to touch base on how I did on my September project, and 5 days after October has started, I'm going to show you the palettes that are going to be on my October palette roundup. If you are new here and you've never seen a video like this before, my name is Jo and I play around with makeup a lot because I have a lot of fun with it. I've gotten more and more into colorful makeup in the last few years. I've also gotten a lot more into indie makeup brands. So if all those kinds of things sound fun to you, you should stick around. I usually have videos every week or so. This one is definitely delayed. I was planning on having it a lot sooner, but the teacher tired is real and it is insanely busy at work right now. In fact, this makeup look has been on since 6 a.m. because today was parent-teacher conference day and I talked to 21 families. So how am I here? I don't know. I had a banana and some toast and soup. So I guess I'm powered by carbs. Let's go. So here are the palettes that were in my September palette project roundup. They were all fall friendly, fall-ish colors, etc. So basically it was just like kind of introduction to fall palettes. So first off, we had Sashimi City by Kaleidos from their Futurism series. Then we had the Child palette from Colourpop. Then we had the Jackie Aina palette with Anastasia Beverly Hills. Then we had the Zendo palette by Natasha Denona. Then we had the Fairy Frolic palette from Unearthly Cosmetics. We also had the Iceland Fire Ice palette from Nomad Cosmetics. And last but not least, we had the Living palette from Corazona in collaboration with Rolina. This is probably like the least fall color story of all of them, but it doesn't matter. I actually really enjoyed all the looks that I did with this set of palettes. And the goal here is just to create these palette clusters in themes throughout the academic year to ensure that all my palettes are getting some consecutive look throughout the year so that I am becoming better acquainted with my eyeshadow collection since it keeps growing. It keeps growing. And I don't even have like all the palettes that I want to buy. Like it's not even funny, y'all, but we'll get into that in a minute. So I think that a good way to go about this would be to start from least used to most used. So the least used palette that I had this month was the Sashimi City palette from the Futurism series by Kaleidos. It is a really nice neutral-ish color story with some pretty nice duochrome shadows over here. I'm not sure why this was the least used palette. I used this one 3 times throughout the month. Actually, I think I know. I think it's because the neutral shades here are shades that I have in other palettes that I can use a little bit more cohesively. And I also think that is because the shimmer shadows in this palette are really, 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 really Fallout intense. So I think that kind of kept me away from using this more, but it is a color story that I enjoy a lot. And it's not a palette that I intend to get rid of at any point in the near future, but it only got 3 uses. Next up, we have the Child palette from Colourpop, which got 4 uses. I expected this to be in the bottom of the usage report because this is a palette that I'm finding myself kind of struggling to use and kind of struggling to make sense of. I've talked about this before. Colourpop is not necessarily my favorite formula in the world. I only have 2 Colourpop palettes, and even between the 2, I feel like the quality of the eyeshadows is very different. This is good quality, but I have better quality greens in my collection. So sometimes it's a little bit like, well, do I actually want to use it? But I did get some really nice looks out of this one, and it definitely convinced me to keep it in my collection a little longer. I'm not gonna declutter it, but it is definitely one that I'm thinking about and really considering if I'm gonna keep it in my collection or not. When I want shades like these, it definitely serves its purpose, but I feel like I'm still struggling to kind of combine it with other eyeshadow palettes. I especially like this green over here. It's probably my favorite shade in the entire palette. It's called Right Hand Mando, and it is kind of like a really icy green with some silver on it. So if I want like a cooler tone inner corner highlight that has some greens, I go for this one sometimes. But I don't know, I don't know what it is with the palette, but there's something about it that keeps me from using it. Maybe it is that the looks end up rather repetitive because it is fairly monochromatic, but I do think that the big factor here is that Colourpop is not necessarily my favorite formula in the world. So there are just other formulas that I enjoy the most. Regardless, it got 4 uses in September. So I'm pretty happy about that. The next ones are probably some that got, no, we still have, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. We still have a few that have 4 uses. So let's just go with the next one right away. And it's Fairy Frolic from Unearthly Cosmetics. I actually thought that I was gonna use this more than I did. The shade that I used the most was this one, which is called Fairy, incidentally. It looks a lot redder in the pan than what you're seeing it on screen. On screen, it looks purple, and in the pan, it looks like salmon color, for lack of a better color description. But I did use the palette, and it's a palette that the more I use, the more I enjoy. So definitely one that is gonna stay in my collection, and I will continue to play this one as we move along. I'm actually wondering if I should take it for an upcoming holiday that I have next week. It's either gonna be this one or maybe another one, but it will be a small palette because we're going to the beach, we're going to Thailand, woohoo! And I don't expect to be doing super elaborate makeup looks. So this one might sneak in there and maybe get a little bit more use, maybe a guest palette in October. I mean, fairies are not necessarily in theme with October, and we'll talk about that later. But it's actually a more versatile palette than you think it could be, and the shimmers and duochromes really make beautiful one and done shadows. 4 uses for Unearthly Fairy Frolic. 4 uses as well for the Living palette by Corazona with Rolina. I actually feel like I did a pretty good job with this palette, and overall I've done a pretty good job with this palette. This was released, sorry, I instinctively look for my glasses and I'm not wearing them right now, oops. This palette was released, if I remember correctly, either in April or May of 2024. As you can see from the dips in the shimmers, I have used it quite heavily. I've traveled with this palette. It travels really well, and it helps you get a lot of looks out of it because it has quite a bit of variety of shades and even a few duochromes. These two are beautiful wet look metallics. M is my favorite shade. So I used it 4 times, including using this shade, Entrañable, which is for me the most challenging shade in the entire palette, but it can be used really well to kind of tone down some of these greens, teals, and blues, which makes for a really kind of lit setting base shade for this one. And then of course some of the other looks were more leaning to these like dusty rose shades, pinks, etc. But it is a really good palette. I would say that this shade, What, is the shade that like I almost never use because it's just too pale for me. I think that maybe to diffuse lines between like shadows, it could work, but it's the shade that I struggle the most to use. But nevertheless, Living got 4 uses in September, which is pretty good. Next up, we have, okay, another 4 use palette, Nomad, Iceland Fire Ice. This has been retired. Some of the palettes that I've shown you are still available. I think most of them are not. If some of them are available, I'll post them in the description box with affiliate links. So if you purchase through them, I may earn a small commission, but I actually think that the majority of the September palettes are palettes that are discontinued. So Nomad, Iceland Fire Ice. I actually think that this is a really fall-friendly color story. And surprisingly, one of the parts of the palette that I enjoy using the most is this column with the reds and the oranges. Those are not my shades at all, but I think that they translate really well onto my skin and, you know, let me have a lot of fun with those. I combined this shade one day when I used the Child palette from Colourpop. I used this shade a couple of times as well. I think that this is a beautiful color story. Nomad has a great formula, and believe it or not, it gets better than this. It's funny because I feel like, I mean, these palettes, this is an older palette, and I will be showing you some newer palettes soon that I'll be using in October, and the jump in formula quality is unbelievable. real. They've really been doing their work over there at Nomad to improve their formula, and it shows so well. This is a really fun color story if you like blues especially, and if you like kind of these muddy greens. It's really, really fun. I really enjoy it, and I used it 4 times in September. Next up, we have 2 palettes to go from September with 5 uses. The Jackie Aina palette from ABH. Once again, to all of you that are saying that these palettes are easy to pan, I don't know. Still think that you're kind of bluffing. But nevertheless, I use this palette 5 times. I'm so proud of myself for that. By the way, if I didn't mention it before, all the looks that I did in September with all of these palettes, including when I combined one palette with another, is over at my Instagram at Joe Sparkly. So if you want to see how I'm using my palettes on my monthly projects on the daily, go over there, and I'm posting like the combinations with swatches and what the look looks like. Please don't go for technique or actual fun makeup looks. Like, I apply my makeup the same all the time. Like, that's not what we're here for. But maybe for color combinations between palettes, maybe I can help you that way. I can do that. So, Jackie Aina palette, shades that I remember using, Ginger and Credit are probably some of my most used shades in the palette. Somehow I managed to not use Sponsored, which is this green brown duochrome, and it's my favorite shade in the entire palette. I somehow managed to not use it. I use Big Wig, I use Supreme, this pink. I combined this with one of the shades in the Live-In palette. So, I mean, this palette is showing a little bit of more visible use. I kind of wish it was more. I don't know why. I think, again, it's like, I feel like I have ABH pan FOMO because everybody says that these are easy to pan, and it's like, no, they're not. No, they're not. And I've had this palette for like 3.5 years or something like that. But anyways, shadows still perform beautifully. Again, I think that Jackie Aina did such a wonderful job to make a really versatile color story. I also think that I'm finally getting the hang of trying to make more subdued looks from this palette, but I think that the key for me is to use either just the mattes or just the shimmers, not all together. I feel like otherwise the look becomes pretty intense and pretty overpowered, unless I'm using something like Lituation, which I did, and that gives me a pretty nice neutral look. Same thing with Trust Issues. This is a really nice eyeshadow topper. If you want to kind of maximize a matte shade and give it a little bit of sparkle, I think that that would go really well. But of course, you have other shades here like Shookington, which is not the most sparkly shimmer in the world, but it gives a really intense look. Again, this is like the golden era of ABH from what I understand. I wasn't in beauty internet at that time, but this was the time when like everybody was excited about these palettes. And I mean, Jackie Aina is a fantastic makeup artist. She is a makeup artist, right? I don't want to like attribute things to anyone that they don't do, but I mean, I've always been really impressed with her looks, and I've learned a lot from like her technique videos. So I was really happy to have this palette, and this one is definitely staying. I enjoy using it quite a bit. And last but not least, we have the clear winner of usage in September. And I think that when I show it, this is gonna be no surprise to anyone. It definitely wasn't a surprise for me. With 6 uses, it's Zendo. Of course it's Zendo, come on. You've been here before, sorry. You've been here before. You know that I love this palette. And here it is. First of all, the pan in Calm is getting quite large. There it is, okay, that's a large pan. And then we have a much more defined pan over here on this brown cream to powder called Mindful. My one disappointment of the month was not being able to hit pan in Aura. You can see that dip is definitely there. I feel like I'm close. I can feel it coming in the pan, but not yet. Excuse me. I can feel the pan coming, but not yet. It's okay. It's okay because Zendo will be in a future project this academic year, so that will give me a chance to take another crack at that pan, and that's fine. Oh, we need to talk about the Guess palettes. I was away for a long weekend, and then one day I just wanted to do something different, so we do have some Guess palettes that we need to talk about, but those were confined to a handful of days in the month and not during weekdays at all. So let's go over the Guess palettes. Okay, so the guest palettes that we have, I actually think will be recurring guest palettes throughout the rest of the year because they just lend themselves to very easy looks, and the shimmers in these little palettes are like perfect one and done shadows, and they are these 5-pan palettes from the Celestial Nirvana collection from Pat McGrath. This was holiday 2022. This one is Nude Allure, and this one is, what is it, Bronze Bliss? Bronze Bliss. So I took Nude Allure or Bronze Bliss. I don't remember which one I took. I took one of these on a long weekend and I used several of the shimmer shades for one and done looks. The other one I think I used to go out on a weekend while still here. Because again, the shimmers are just really, really easy one and done shadows. They are like quick weekend looks when I want to have a little bit of sparkle in my eye, but I want to go too crazy or mix a bunch of eyeshadows together. So I think that these are just gonna be like recurring guest stars in the monthly palette projects. So expect to see them more. Let me see if I can show you a little bit of like what the usage looks like. So as you can see, this probably has fewer dips, but I definitely see myself having this on an actual project rotation later in the year. I can definitely think of a monthly theme where that one fits especially well because the shades are more metallic. And then this one is Nude Allure, and this one is the one that I use most often. You can see some dips there. These shimmers are kind of soft. Definitely not the same shimmer formula that you get like on the Mothership palettes, but I maintain that these little 5-pan palettes, is it 5 or 6? 5. These 5-pan palettes are a really good introduction at a pretty decent price point into the Pat McGrath formula. So her holiday collection, Luminous Legends, just came out, and now there are even eyeshadow duos. So I imagine even more accessible, and I'm sure that that's the goal. The other guest shadow that we had is a liquid shadow, and this was just one use, which is this e.l.f. Duochrome Liquid Eyeshadow, and this is the shade Mermazing. I used it once. I did notice when I opened it that it is kind of it's a bit of a mix between drying down and getting a little bit hard to reach. So I think I'm gonna keep a close eye on it and use it as much as I can. If it starts to become drier and drier, I think that it might be a matter of putting it in the retirement tour. But at the same time, it is a pretty small component. Like there's not a whole lot of product here. And I've used those a whole bunch since I bought them. And I bought them when they launched, which was last fall or around there. So overall, how do I feel about the usage that I got out of these like welcome fall friendly palettes, fall color-ish palettes that I chose for September? Pretty good. I'm pretty proud of myself for finding ways to use palettes together so that I could maximize the usage of palettes throughout the month. I'm really proud of the fact that there was no palette left behind. They all got used more than once, more than twice. So that makes me really happy, and that's kind of the energy that I want to bring into October. And in October, we're gonna go all about the spook, of course. October, spooky season, Halloween is coming. I put like the 5 Halloween decoration items that I have out, and they're already out in my living room, but we don't have a lot. I do have quite a bit that I chose for October. Hello. When I got to the editing chair, I realized that I missed one of the guests for September, and it was this guest palette, Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction. I used it on the Saturday that I had to go to work because I was kind of mad about having to go to work, and I was like, okay, if I'm gonna have to be at work, I'm gonna wear cool eyeshadow. So I decided on this one. Bronze Seduction is the first Pat McGrath mothership for a lot of people, and I mean, look at the color story. It's really all audiences friendly and really everyday makeup friendly, so it's always a good idea. This will return in a future project with her mothership sisters, so expect that in the future I will be pulling this one more, but I did use it once in September. It's like all but one are indie. Can you consider Colourpop an indie brand? Is Colourpop an indie brand? I don't know, because now it's at Target, so I think that Colourpop has crossed the indie realm. So very indie heavy for October, but I do think that this selection speaks to the fact that indie brands are willing and able to take more risks in color stories and do things that are maybe a little bit more outside the box and more fun. Believe it or not, there's a lot of color here. Some of the palettes are newer to me than others. Actually, I've had all of these palettes for less than 2 years, I'm pretty sure. So let's go over the October roundup. First off, of course, Ru Roh Raggy from Scooby Doo and Glamlite. We've been actually watching some episodes of Scooby Doo, and I mean, here's a color story. It's very green purple because it's in theme with the characters and stuff, which makes a lot of sense. I actually used one of these shimmers, I think it was this one already. So this palette already has one use in October. I've already used it. I use the shimmers way more than the mattes, but you want some serious shimmers, go Glamlite, check them out. I would say even go check like all the horror palettes that they released last year. I've heard really good things about the quality of some of them, especially the Chucky palette. So if you want a more like dark color story, maybe Glamlite could be a good place to look. But I think that this will be kind of like my palette where I want a really intense shimmer or want to have like a very specific sparkle. But one of my goals is to definitely use the mattes a little bit more, because I have used them, but they're not showing use as the shimmer. So there's a little bit of a use imbalance in the palette. But it's on for October and it already has one use. Palette number 2, Dead of Night from Unearthly. I mean, look at the color story, man. Look at this. I mean, this is a purple lover's dream. And of course, you have some super cool duochromes. This is the better formula from Unearthly, to my understanding, and it is my favorite palette from the brand. I have 4. You will see others here because, I mean, obviously, Unearthly does these very like unique color stories that are a little bit more out there, a little bit less normal. See what I did there? That's coming, don't worry. But I haven't used this one yet, even though it's October 5th, but I'm definitely looking forward to use some of the purples and maybe even this darker green teal. I'm excited to see what I can do with that. This shade called Nightfall is one of my favorites. It looks beautiful in the eyes. So yeah, I use these palettes mostly for work, but my students have a lot of fun with my very colorful makeup. I have a lot of fun with my very colorful makeup. So yeah, I use this in my normal life. I really don't care. Dead of Night, palette number 2. Number 3, let's just actually go through the 3 Unearthly palettes that I have. Yes, I have 3 Unearthly palettes in this project. Palette number 3, Not Normal. I've used it already. This is of course the pre-reformulation iteration of Not Normal. This was recently re-released and I think it's like double the size. It has like an entire new side that is, if I remember correctly, pretty different from this one. It's a little bit deeper. So I personally have no interest in buying it because I don't want the other side really. This is a really interesting color story and lets you do some pretty different things. It looks a little washed on camera, to be honest. It looks more pastel than it actually is. The shadows are pretty interesting and like this yellow and this green are like pretty close to primary colors. I really enjoy this shade Day Job and this shade Grunge. My favorite shade is this one, is Gemini, and it's the shade that I used a couple days ago. It's one of the best shades in the palette. It's my favorite shade in the palette actually, but this is a color story that is really like out there and it leaves, in my opinion, a lot of room for companion palettes. So I'm excited to use this one more as well. Palette number 3, this is the palette that I'm wearing today in combination with a multi-chrome from another palette. I'll show you that in a minute, but this is the palette that I'm wearing right now, which is the Sleepover palette from Unearthly. Why are you including a pink sleepover theme palette on a spooky palettes project? Well, aren't the calls coming from inside the house in all the horror movies? Sometimes that happens during sleepovers. Okay, whatever. I grasp at straws, okay? I don't care. But if you love pinks, this is a really, really dreamy color story to work with. The Mattes, in my opinion, need a little bit of building up. I used this shade today, Beloved, and it required a little bit of building up. Even with eyeshadow primer, I needed a few layers so that I could get a uniform shade of the matte color, which again is one of the things that leads me to understand why it was pulled from the market. I think that there may have been some inconsistencies in the formula, and Unearthly feels probably like they're in a position to do better. I did use the shade Satin as my inner corner highlight. It's kind of gone at this point, but it is a shade that I really enjoy using for that purpose. And then I also use the shade Sleepover as my eyeliner. I have my waterline lined up with black eyeliner, but the rest of the black that you see in my under eyes is the shade Sleepover, which is actually a really fun black with pink sparkles to use. I love pink eyeshadow and like purpley mauve eyeshadow, so this one I expect to get quite a bit of use out of, and you know, I have like 3 shades on me today. You can see the full color story that I put together today on my Instagram. Okay, palette number 4, Blue Moon from Colourpop. More than anything, I kind of wanted to find a place for this one. Moon is usually associated with spooky stories. For some reason, this was being really hard to open. If I want blues, I think this will be a really solid option. My favorite shade is this one in the middle called Billie Jean, which is kind of like a periwinkly silver blue. I really like it. I wish you could see the dip a little bit more closely. You can see the dip in this one though, that counts. Really solid matte. I personally prefer the formula of this one over the formula of the Child palette. I think that this is a more consistent formula. The mattes are more uniform, but maybe that's just because I really like wearing blue eyeshadow. Blue eyeshadow goes really well with brown eyes. It makes them really shiny and kind of accentuates the brown, makes them pop. So I really like using blue eyeshadow. Let's talk about the eyeshadow palette that includes the multichrome that I am wearing today. Not sure if it's visible, but I'll show you the palette regardless. And it's the Resurrection palette from Wicked Widow Beauty. This is one of the largest palettes that I own at 24 pans. And it is probably the closest to a rainbow palette that I own as well. However, I think about half of this palette is duochromes, multichromes, something of the sort. Today I'm using this one called Ethereal. There you go, you see a little bit of the pink and the purple. I really love the shift on that one. I haven't used every single shade in the palette. I have swatched it and it's on my, I think it's on my YouTube shorts. If not, I will upload swatch shorts of this one so that you guys can see it. It is a really large palette, but it does have a lot of multi-chromes. It could be, I think, a good option for someone that wants a whole bunch of multi-chromes in one place. That could make it really fun, but also like the pairings between one matte, one sparkle, matte, sparkle, it's really intuitive to use. I don't know if they did that on purpose, but also like you can kind of create quads in your mind really easily. It's a pretty versatile palette. I definitely want to use it a whole lot more than I have because I just got my hands on it this summer. I do think that Wicked Widow is a little bit of a niche brand. I definitely don't see them kind of like doing super mainstream friendly things, but I am very impressed with the quality, and the multichromes are super fun. Just be aware that the multichromes are quite flaky, so there may be fallout. I made the mistake of not using glitter glue this morning, and I should have. And now let's talk about the last 2 palettes included in my October project. I am beyond excited about this and already swooning over them because the quality is fantastic and the color stories are incredibly fun. And it is the Spooky Duo from Nomad Cosmetics. Haunted Europe and Ghost Town USA. I set an alarm to get these because I kept seeing reviews and videos and swatches and all of that of both of them, especially Ghost Town USA. I wasn't around the first time that Haunted Europe was released. I don't think I saw any videos about that. This Ghost Town USA, this was their Halloween release for last year. Look at it. I mean, for real. It's so dreamy but cool. I love it. I love it so much, and the quality is ridiculous. It's so good. If you want to see reviews, I encourage you to go back on videos from last year. Some of my favorite creators put this palette on their top 10 or their top 5 of last year. I was just watching Makeup Just for Fun, Amanda, doing like a ranking of her Nomad palettes. I don't know when the video is from, but she put this one on top. This was her favorite one. The color story is fantastic and the shadows are very, very high quality. I've already used it once and I definitely expect to use it a whole bunch this month. And of course, the packaging. I mean, look at it. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And this is the kind of thing that is like, you're gonna give me joy with the eyeshadows and the packaging. I love you. I just love you, okay? And then the last one is Haunted Europe. And this one, I actually think that is an even more clever color story. I was hesitant at first. I was like, I don't know. I think this has way too much color. I don't know that I like it. And then I saw and I bought it. I was like, okay, look, I'm just gonna buy it. It's gonna be fine. I'm sure that there will be shadows that I'll like. I'm sure I'll use it a bunch anyway. And then I swatched it and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. It's so perfect. I don't know, it's like everything that I imagine would be in like haunted forests in Europe and like in castles with like old drapes and I don't know, Dracula. This is what this palette gives me. It's like Dracula and the forest of Transylvania. I'm sure that that's probably some of the stuff that they had in mind because some of the pan embossing is bats. So, but I mean, superb quality from Nomad. So impressed with both of those, but those are the palettes that are in my October project. I'm hoping to keep the guest palettes to a minimum this month because I have quite a lot to work with, not only in terms of numbers of palettes, but also in number of pans. Like the 2 Nomad palettes are 18 pan palettes. The Resurrection palette is 24 pans, and then the rest of them are, let's see, 2 of my on the Unearthly palettes are 12 pan palettes, and then the other 2 are 9 pan palettes. And then I have the Scooby Doo palette, which is a 10 pan palette. So it's quite a few eyeshadow pans to work with. So I have a lot to play with. So I don't see myself needing to dip into guest palettes in October, but I am going away for a week. So it might be one of these palettes. I'm actually thinking about maybe Haunted Europe. I'm not sure. But I really do have a lot to work with and I'm really excited to keep using all of these palettes. So once again, to round up, here is my stack of palettes for spooky season / October. Scooby Doo Ru Roh Raggy from Glamlite. Dead of Night by Unearthly Cosmetics. Not Normal, also by Unearthly Cosmetics, the first iteration of this palette. Blue Moon by Colourpop. The Sleepover palette from Unearthly Cosmetics. Ghost Town USA from Nomad, Haunted Europe also from Nomad, and last but not least, the Resurrection palette from Wicked Widow Beauty. And that's it. These are my palettes for October. These are gonna be the main focus of my eyeshadow use and I'm really excited, like I said. Tell me in the comments, do you own any of these palettes? Are you rotating any palettes in for October for slightly grungier, more spooky looks? I would love to hear from you. If you are using any of these palettes this month, let me know which one. I would love to go check your Instagram and compare looks if you post them. I will be posting my looks on Instagram and my color story combinations as often as possible. One last thing. My analytics show that the vast majority of people that watch my videos are not subscribed to the channel, but I do have a number of those viewers that are returning viewers. So if you keep coming back, baby, why don't you just subscribe? If you subscribe, then YouTube will tell you every time I upload a video and you don't have to wait for YouTube to suggest it to you. Make your life easier. You're already watching. Might as well subscribe, right? Why not? We get a little silly over here. We're not afraid to make a fool of ourselves and we have a lot of fun with all of the makeup. So thank you for following along and coming back to get the recap from September. I hope you're getting excited for fun looks in October, just like I am. And I will see you next time with more makeup shenanigans in a new video. Bye.